We are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for the 13th, not 14th, 13th lecture of Game Production Masterclass. And today we are joined by Matej Jan, and he'll be talking about fundraising. But before we go into a description of him and this lecture, we'll just do some housekeeping things. First of all, I would like to thank our partners and sponsors on this project. First of all, Center for Creativity, which this project is part of, and it's co-financed by European Union and the Republic of Slovenia. And our thanks also to our sponsor, Outfit 7 and Retronator, which are one of the biggest game companies in Slovenia. And last, thanks to Slovenia Games and Reveris for organizing this whole event. And this whole lecture will look like this. First, we'll have 1 hour of Matej representing fundraising. And then we'll have 30 minutes, around 30 minutes, a little bit more, a little bit less of Q&A. And if you want to ask any questions in between, you can type them in the chat and we will ask them at the end. There will also be a link to notes where you can take notes and collaborate with other students on this masterclass program. And this is all for like this basic stuff. And now I will just go and do a quick intro to Matej. He's an indie game developer currently living in Sweden in Spelkollektivet, which is like a big game dev house with around 50 game developers. And there he's also one of the mentors and lecturers, right, Matej, for the Indie Quest, which is also like a program which teaches like all from basics like of game engines, how do you create games, how do you like then market it and so on. And with that, he has a lot of like experience. He's also like creator of Pixel Art Academy, which is a game where you learn how to draw and how to like make art. And he also creates a magazine which is called Retronator, and he'll be talking about that also in his lecture. And without further ado, I will just give you the word, Matej, and you can kick it off.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, thank you for having me. So yeah, you kind of stole my introduction slides. My name is Matej Jan, and better known on the internet as Retro, especially if some of you are old enough to remember a certain magazine I used to write for in Slovenia. These days I write mostly for my own blog, Retronator, like Rok said. Yeah, it's a magazine, it's a blog about pixel art and indie games. So it's been, I've been writing for it for over 10 years. So I've seen a lot of games and game projects and heard a lot of stories of how they went through their fundraising. And then I also have my own firsthand experience. Like he said, I'm working on a game called Pixel Art Academy, which was on Kickstarter all the way back in 2015. I raised $60,000 about. And this is already a first lesson of the day of this talk, is that whenever you see these kind of numbers, it's rarely, nobody actually gets the money that you see posted. So first of all, there's credit card fees. There's Kickstarter takes a 5% fee. So of this 60K, I've only seen 55 arrive in my bank account. And then after this, you also have to take into account that this is direct revenue. So depending on what kind of tax situation you're in, you're also going to pay more or less taxes. So after taxes, I was still living in the US at this time. It was quite a hit. And so yeah, this is 30K basically what I got out of my Kickstarter that I can actually spend on my game. Since I am a solo developer, that's also not that bad, nothing to complain about. So if you live a normal life, this pretty much gives you 2 years of making your game full-time, and that's a gift. But obviously, especially for my game, which is a long-term project, I keep putting out releases with new content over time. Kickstarter is not sustainable, right? It's by its nature is something that you can start with, but if you want to do something long-term, you need to find sustainable source of income. So I am also on Patreon right now, which over the years has grown from 300 to almost 900 a month. And I'm selling pre-orders of my game as well. So that brings about $100 a month as well. And so that's how, for the first 4 years of development of Pixel Art Academy, I was able to work on it full time for 4 years. And then eventually, like I said, Kickstarter money eventually runs out. And 900 a month is still not enough to cover all of your expenses, after rent and health insurance and all of that. So I did what a lot of people also do, and you get some side income. And this is what Rok mentioned is I am here. We have a school, the Indie Quest, where I am the learning designer and teacher. And so I do this to cover my living expenses here at Spell Collectivet. It's a wonderful place to live. And so, yeah, all of these things together is, for me, at least, a very nice way to make a living. And yeah, for this, I was able to, for the last 6 years, I was able to do what I love. And hopefully in this talk, I can tell you how you could do the same, or at least what are the possibilities out there that I see from myself and from other game developers, how they go about this. So fundraising in this specific case, how to make money before a video game is released. So, after you have a game out, obviously you can get money from it, but how do you kickstart? How do you launch your career into game development when you're trying to make your own game? So we're going to look at this from multiple perspectives. And the first one is going to be, where in the development process are you currently with your game? So here are the different stages. If you're at the very start in the top left, all you have is an idea or a mock-up how a game should look like. Well, crowdfunding is definitely one of the options. It's quite hard if you just have an idea, but it's doable. And crowdfunding, I think you've probably heard, Indiegogo was the first one, but especially as soon as I say Kickstarter, which started in 2009, you all, I think, know what I'm talking about. And it really went mainstream in 2012 when this campaign came onto Kickstarter. It was from Double Fine, Tim Schafer of Monkey Island and Psychonauts, Grim Fandango fame. They were the first to actually break $1 million. So they only asked for $400,000. 300 was to make a small game, because if you have a big studio with 300,000, that's not a big budget. And then 100,000 would be for 2-player productions to make a documentary about it. So either case, if this goes horribly wrong, you still get something nice. You get a product out of it, at least those documentaries. Obviously, it went way better. So they raised 10 times more money, or almost. And so it was, one of the biggest, or I think at the time, the most successful Kickstarter. So really big, really good for, it started these big Kickstarter campaigns. And a lot of big companies started making Kickstarters, but it was also good for small developers. So like me, I also, when I started, I literally just had an idea and a mock-up. Like I had this picture and a couple of others. And my campaign was also successful. I think if you just have an idea, it really has to be some sort of a strong concept. And in this case, it's the idea is you actually learn with this game. You're not just pretending to be an art student, but you actually, through the gameplay, you actually have to learn all of the, art theory and practice and everything. So that's something. I didn't come up with it. This is an old thing. There were a lot of educational games in the 90s, but it's something that has over the years become less and less served. So there's demand, but not enough supply. And these kind of things you'll see more examples of this kind of stuff where there was something in the past that's not being delivered anymore. Those are really great things for this kind of alternative funding sources, which was the case with the point-and-click adventures as well. Like Double Fine was like, yeah, we can't get a publisher to give us money to make a point-and-click adventure. So they went to Kickstarter instead. So it's crowdfunding. Even after the crowdfunding campaign is over, you could keep on taking pledges. Those are called late backers. There's the most popular platform is BackerKit, where basically as your Kickstarter campaign is over, you get this little button here that you can link to somewhere, and then you link it to BackerKit, where again people can pay for the same tiers. And then Indiegogo also has an option here downstairs that you can continue a previous campaign, and it even says how much it raised on other platforms. Then the next thing, if you just have an idea or mock-up, is you can start taking donations. Even before you have a game and you're just starting to write on Twitter, hey, I'm going to be working on this game, you can, let people give you money for it. And especially once because this can grow with you, especially once you have a demo, this can really kick off. And it's not also a new concept yet again. In the past, people have made a lot of tools that they would give out for free, and then they would just take donations for it. And in practice, the way this looks like is, you have a PayPal button on your website. Sure, a lot of you have know this concept. There's also Coffee, which is a web. If you don't have your own website to put the button on, Coffee gives you a little nice profile that you can link to from your posts, but essentially just links to it has a PayPal button on it. And then these days, Patreon is also a much more popular thing when it comes to this. And then here, Patreon, well, we'll talk about it later as well, but especially for free stuff, that's why I still put it under donations here. The most popular example would be Dwarf Fortress. If those of you who know this game that looks like ASCII art, very popular, or maybe not that popular, but it has a very cult following. And so it started already in 2002. The followers, the people that were super into the development of the game, they asked, hey, we want to support you. And they put the PayPal button on. And then 4 years later, when they released the first actual playable version in 2006, they started making $1,000 a month approximately. So, and this game is free. So they would be getting through donations. This is not even, monthly subscription and stuff, just through donations, they were making, $1,000 a month. And then almost 10 years later in 2015, because this one has been in development for such a long time. So in 2015, they also made a Patreon account. And it's right now, it's, bringing them in $8,000 a month. And like I said, it's like you can just go play the game for free. You don't have to give anything to them. Like the Patreon campaign only has one tier for $1. And there's no rewards. There's no updates, anything. So and you can see that per patron, they actually get more than, they get $2.50 per patron. So a lot of people are actually willing to give more to this. So this is if you really love some game. That's definitely an option to go about it. Next up, you could find yourself an investor. This is also if you're starting very early. Here, I'm just going to use a little bit of VC, venture capital terminology. They have this series of funding. So seed would be the first one, and then Series A, B, C when you raise more and more money. But even before that happens, you have the pre-seed phase when you're just starting out. There's different investors you could rely on. And the first one is pretty much you yourself or other team members. And this in practice just means, hey, maybe you have some savings. You can now pour them into your game project. Or very popular one as well, you have a job on the side or even your main job, and then you're pouring those, you use that to cover your expenses and you work on your game on the side. There's also, it's not uncommon to have, maybe your parents pay for your solo project, let's say, for some time. And there's also government grants. This is a whole can of worms that I'm not even gonna try and go into too much, but there are, because sometimes it's going to be limited about, it's just for narrative games, or you have to have a previous project that you've already worked on. There's a lot of paperwork to submit. So but it is out there. It does exist. It really depends where you live and what kind of opportunities you have. But it is something that you can apply with basically just an idea, especially if you have previous things to show for. Angel investors, now we're more entering into this VC venture capital world. Angel investors are pretty much people that are willing to give you money very early on. So if somebody really likes you, they might be willing to invest even early on, but then later on they will be joined with venture capital money in the seed round when they would be raising for the first starts. The reason why I'm talking about is in this context of game development, which is a little bit maybe weird, but it's actually becoming way more common for venture capital money to go into gaming. And that's because, especially nowadays, you have games with NFTs and Web 3.0 and esports and the whole AR, VR, metaverse. That's like, those are magnets for VC money these days. And so there's actually quite a lot of venture capital firms that are specializing on just gaming. And if you are interested in this field, again, this is like government grants, it's whole thing where you have to pitch to investors, it's all its own thing. If you're interested in this, for example, Play Ventures have good slides, a lot of resources. How do you create a pitch for? So that's definitely one way certain companies with certain types of games are going into it. Next up, if you already have an alpha demo, so now we've left the idea mockup. Now, if you already have something playable, well, crowdfunding definitely is an option. In fact, that's actually how most of campaigns nowadays are done. A lot of people don't dare go on Kickstarter without having a demo, and a lot of times they will actually take this opportunity to release the demo for the campaign, with the campaign, during the campaign. So that generates extra marketing for the campaign. Very common thing. And then another version is, instead of putting out a demo out for free, if you have something playable, if you have an alpha version, why not just charge for it? And that's the concept behind alpha funding. There's multiple ways how to go about it. One is to just have your own store. You just integrate PayPal or Stripe into your website. Again, you could even integrate it completely into your game. This is how I have it. I mean, my game runs in the browser, so it's a little bit easier. But the concept is still the same. Like for me, you actually have to play through the game and then you meet my virtual self there. Anyway, if you're not as crazy as me, you can also just put the purchase button, checkout button on your website. And if you're even less crazy and you don't want to do all this integration and stuff, you can, there's this great thing called the Humble widget, which makes things very convenient. This is how it looks like. It's basically, a PayPal button, but it has, they will take care of a lot of stuff for you, like VAT and hosting the build. They will, so they will send out Steam keys, for example, if you have them. So very convenient thing from the creators of the Humble Bundle. There's a lot of games that use it. So this is quite a popular option. And then finally, I'm pretty sure all of you have heard of early access. That's basically just how, when alpha funding became popular and after that Steam picked up on it, or like that enabled this kind of a funding model, they called it early access. And nowadays, basically almost nobody even uses the term alpha funding anymore like we used to back then. We just say early access. And Good Old Games also has a program called Games in Development. Yeah, early access, here's an example, you know how it works. Obviously, you're giving more big revenue share to Steam, but in return, you're getting market, you get discoverability through the Steam store, for example. And then after your game, if you're already selling your alpha version, as soon as you get to 1.0 version, well, now selling alpha just becomes selling your game. So that's just, your normal, nothing pretty much changes. And now for the most common way to get funding for game development is actually to get a publishing deal. I'm pretty sure you've all heard of all of your, Microsoft's, Activision's, Electronic Arts. These are big publishers for big games, for big teams. You're not going to have a lot of luck, if you're two people just out of college pitching your platform or idea to Microsoft. You might have a harder time. Square Enix is the most, maybe they have Square Enix Collective that's specifically for indie games. And there's obviously, in the past, there was like Microsoft had the Xbox LA Live Arcade program. But nowadays, a lot of these kind of things, you just publish your own little small games, but they're not gonna give you funding for it. But they are quite open to have indie games on, Xbox and Switch. To get actual funding, because indie games became much more popular, there are quite many indie-specific publishers for indie games. A lot of times it would be actually indie developers that had some successful games like Chucklefish, Team 17. Indie Fund is basically just a collective of a lot of successful indie developers that are basically giving out funds. And then there's the whole mobile game publishers, which is a whole other world. And I'm not even going to touch it because Primer is going to talk about it next week. Yeah, we're not going to look at that. But, I'm in the indie world mainly, so I can talk a little bit more about that. And so what are you getting if you decide to go with a publisher? Well, first of all, obviously, we're talking about funding. That's what you were trying to get some money in advance. But a lot of times it's also marketing. A lot of people will actually go to publishers even when they don't need funding and they just want the marketing expertise and the distribution expertise. What you usually don't give, especially to indie publishers, is they don't get creative control. So you're in control, but depending on the publisher, they might want more or less give you feedback and kind of influence you. And they're also there for your support when you are needing, you have questions of like, hey, can we do Q&A testing and this kind of stuff? So yeah, they also cover this kind of services, quality assurance, localization, porting. Maybe they even have an in-house studio where they can give you developers if you're, understaffed or stuff like that. So what do you give in return to them? Well, obviously, they're a publisher. You give them distribution rights. They are now in control of putting the game out onto the market, charging what kind of price they're going to charge, where are they going to sell it. And unlike in venture capital, they take a part of your company. Instead, publishers take part of your revenue. So rev share, profit share. That's what you're giving. You're giving a percentage of the sales. They're going to be taking those out. Another thing that you're not giving to, especially to indie publishers, is IP, intellectual property. You get to keep your IP. Instead, what you do give them sometimes is the first offer, which means let's say that you're talking about a sequel. You have to first talk to them as the publisher of the original. They have to get the first offer out to you, and only if they refuse it, now you can go talk to other publishers. And I have a couple of examples here of different publishing contracts, but because we don't have that much time, feel free to ask me in the Q&A. We can go through all of this. There's a lot of things that I have in this talk that I've sort of had to push to the end in case somebody is more interested in this. So if you're interested in learning more about publishers, just at the end, ask me, and we can, for example, look at those different deals just so that you have a little bit of a better idea of what kind of things are out there. Because when it comes to publishers, there's as many publishing deals as there are publishers and as there are games. So it's really, really varied. Finally, now we're at the very end, the pre-release. We're right in front of release. Crowdfunding, yet again, is one of the options. A lot of, well, maybe not a lot, but like some companies plan on making a Kickstarter right before the release just for marketing purposes. And then there's others that do it for polishing the game. For example, here's a real small solo developer. Very small goal, just raised $3,000, was just for getting some portrait art for the game and music. Even if this campaign was unsuccessful, it's completely fine because the game is already made. It's just polish. And in fact, this game already had a campaign before that, 1 year before the release, that raised another small sum, 6,000. And then it was like, well, I can make it better if I put this other campaign out. And the game actually ended up being, very well, or it was a good game, has very positive reviews, didn't get that much popularity. And I want to, as I'm going to be talking about a lot of ways how to make money, I also really want to highlight what's the actual realistic, like a lot of game developers, what's the actual reality for a lot of indie developers. And it could be like here, he published his first month results. He only sold 200 copies the first month, and you know how it is, like there's a spike at the start and then you don't earn that much until maybe sales and stuff. So he only made $2,000. That's on top of the 9,000 from the Kickstarters, and that's the realistic thing. He even had an earlier failed Kickstarter 5 years back. So that's a lot of realistic scenarios. You're gonna have a failed Kickstarter, or you're gonna have a Kickstarter that barely raises a couple of thousand, and you're gonna have very little revenue at the end. I mean, relatively speaking, and you have put 5 years of your life into this. So that's you know, realistic. That's what you are signing up for. Very realistic possibility for a lot of developers. Another option, the final one, if you're also right close to the release, is to just release it in episodes. This actually happened to Double Fine Adventure, the Kickstarter game that started this whole boom. At that time, it was known as Broken Age, and they realized, yeah, they had more than half a game done, but they would run out of money before they could release it. And so they came up with, well, we're just going to split it into 2 parts, and we're going to put the part 1 out first, and that is going to fund the development of the next part. Here's another example. The game Foxtail was actually unsuccessful on Kickstarter, but then they released what they had, the first chapter, they released it into early access on Steam. And then over the next years, they released 2 more chapters, and now they're still working on it. They also opened a Patreon in 2020. And again, here's another counter example. Not every game is like Dwarf Fortress that makes $8,000. This is the realistic scenario. Most people actually earn a couple of $100. We'll see a lot more of these kind of graph examples as we go on. And just finally, for my sake, episodic releases aren't actually that new either. There's this thing called shareware that we really loved back in the 90s. That's basically how a lot of, you know, your Epic games started. They were selling games. They were a little bit different. They made all the episodes already, but they shared the first episode for free so that we could all play it. And then you would send them money in an envelope or, you know, over the internet to buy the rest of the episodes. So here's the full picture of based on where we are in the dev cycle. And yeah, since game developers, we are kind of we're creative creatures. So it's not necessarily that just you make money from your game. So we're going to look at the different kind of things you could be selling besides games. So we have games, but there's also other categories of things. So let's just take a look at the game because we just talked about it. We can go quickly through it. You know, publishing, investments, like we said, is the typical way how to get money. And then if you already have a demo, obviously just start charging for it. If you have episodes, start charging for it. Now with crowdfunding, it starts being a little bit more interesting because on crowdfunding, a lot of these kind of campaigns, you are not necessarily just backing the game. There's a lot of people that want to just support the creator. You support them, they have an idea and you want to support them to develop it. In fact, on crowdfunding, on Kickstarter, you're not obliged to provide the end result. It's not a store where you pre-order the game. You are investing into that creation or into the process of creation. You're not guaranteed that something's going to come out of it, but what the creators should bring is the updates, telling people the story of how this project is being developed. So that's a very common thing that, you know, there's definitely this other component. And a lot of times it happens, you've backed some games and then when they come out, you've opened it up once and not played. Like it's quite common. And then now we get to patronage as well. This goes even wider. We're going to look at a lot of examples of this. And what do I mean by patronage? Like I already mentioned Patreon before in the context of Dwarf Fortress. But in the Dwarf Fortress example, it was basically, I considered it a donation because the game is completely free and you get nothing in return. If you give that $1 to Dwarf Fortress Patreon, you don't get anything in return. But most of the times, the way Patreon is used is very similar to crowdfunding. You have different tiers where you can get different rewards, except instead of crowdfunding, where you give one-time big amount of money, on Patreon, on patronage would be giving monthly small amount per month. And I really love it because it's a thing that can really grow with you. So we're going to look at a couple of examples. We're just going to stay right at home in Slovenia. Here's a game called Saragnar from Damjan Mazetic. Really wonderful to see his graph, how this is what I'm talking about. The growth happens over time. So you can see like 5 years on Patreon. and just slowly rises with the popularity of the game. And the game is inspired by Betrayal of at Krondor. And for all the fans of that game, as soon as they see Call of Saragnar, it's like, oh my God, this is exactly what I want to play, because I'm a fan of that game, and this one is going to give me that kind of a same experience. This has been oftentimes a really good thing for crowdfunding and Patreon and this kind of stuff. A very good way to get funds for these kind of ideas. What do you get in return? Well, when you pledged for the Kickstarter, for the Patreon, you could get a demo of the game, whereas the demo otherwise wasn't accessible. And then also, if you amount enough money over the years, because you could be giving $1 a month, but then in 30 months, you have given $30, and then you would, at the end, when the game is released, you would actually get a copy for it. Another example here is a game that was actually first on Kickstarter, Peace Island. They reached 350 backers, raised $13,000. However, let's take a look on Patreon. After this was a little bit popular, they were still working on it. On Patreon, they actually have 7 times the amount of patrons. And at the start, they were earning over $16,000 a month. So more than they raised in that one Kickstarter, now they are earning a month. So yeah, it's amazing to see what is possible and how much people are willing to just follow, for the game and then for the story as well. So on this, I have a couple more examples of this kind of like personality and story, the things that people follow as an alternative to just the game. For example, here's Eniko. She does a lot of different projects, also funded from different things, not just from Patreon. And it's also not, her Patreon isn't super big, but it's still interesting to see that, there's this growth. And at 2019, when you see the growth stop, she actually stopped posting to Patreon. But it did not actually fall down immediately. Sometimes you can see quite steep falls when somebody stops posting to Patreon. But in this case, because a lot of people they don't necessarily support the game specifically that she makes, or because she makes different ones as well. They support her personally. And she has followers on Twitter, and and she's outspoken, so a lot of people can relate to her. And so even after she doesn't post more stuff, well, you're still connected to her on Twitter, and you might still want to support her. Similar thing for where people will actually just support you for the story is Ooblets. Some of you might have heard about Ooblets in 2019 when they took the deal with Epic Store. There was a lot written about it, and you can see where that happens in the graph because it got also some backlash. But yeah, it's a lovely game. They started from zero. They just started posting GIFs. They focused on the art, posted GIFs, and people were so into it that they would just pledge to Patreon for nothing in return but to know how development is going. And even after the release in 2020, you see they're still making a lot of, they still have a lot of patrons after that. So, in this cases, it's, you really want this extra thing that you get besides just the game, actually getting the game and playing it. The next category is art. There's people that just, that people would support just for their art. Octavio Navarro is a such example. He did this wonderful pixel art illustrations. His Patreon is also not big, so he has other stuff, like he was the pixel artist on Thimbleweed Park, among others. And then he also makes little small games, gives them out for free. And nowadays, I think he's just about to release, I think maybe his first Steam game. I guess it's going to be a paid thing. So, it's a combination of things. Here's the graph for my Patreon. I also have a little bit of a combination. Mostly it's game related, but I also have like an art component. First of all, in my tiers, what you get besides the game, access to the game, you get monthly vlogs, and in the background of the vlogs, I put time lapses of artworks, so you kind of see how my process looks like. And then I also you get a pack of my wallpapers and posters that I've done over the years, because I have like almost 100, and it can, it's not something somebody will support me specifically for, but it's a nice thing that I can also give this as one of the rewards, because oftentimes when you're thinking about Patreon and crowdfunding and this kind of stuff is like, oh, what do I do as rewards? And so art is a nice thing. If you just want to sell your art directly, there's merch, by which I mean merchandise, like stickers and posters or T-shirts. There's quite many options how to go about it. I'm not going to go super into it. Like you can sell it in generic stores. There's websites that will do all of the kind of printing on demand for you and send it out, or sites that specialize just for like games and stuff. And then even Patreon has their own merchandise fulfillment. Here's an example of the Yeti, which is a site where Ublets is selling their stuff. But oftentimes merch is such a small amount of income. It's more about fan service. It's something nice to give out. But it could be a nice little side income, I guess, if you really have good art that sells well. Some good designs on T-shirts, stuff like that. And then final category, development insights. This is different than the story. In story, you're saying, what have you done? You tell them, what the progress is, what kind of features you put in. With development insights, I mean, how games are made. You're sharing things that would be interesting to other game developers, or even others that are just being fascinated by how game development works, but they aren't necessarily going to do it themselves. There's plenty of YouTube channels with tutorials and blogs about, that just teach you how to make games. Here's some examples. Sly Nerd has written tutorials, been posting them for years, like 2 to 3 years, very consistently, and then was able to focus after that. As he has grown his Patreon, he was able to focus on making art for his game. So yeah, over 2 or 3 years, wrote more than 30 tutorials, and all of these tutorials are free. So all of the stuff that he gets on Patreon is people just basically donating money. It's like, I love what you're doing. Here's my money. And so yeah, he posts them in this text form, and then he also does these little gifts. He creates these 3 gifts that he then posts on Twitter. And this is, on Twitter, these kind of things go retweeted a lot. And so it's really good. This is what drives people to his Patreon campaign. Another example, the same amount of patrons, for example, 200, but it's actually quite, you can now, at $2,000, you can make a living out of it. And it's possible if you have like higher paying tiers. For example, here we see at $9 and $22, you can actually download assets. And we'll talk about assets in a moment. And he also ranks very high on Google. So I think I found him by searching for atmosphere shader tutorials. So, and he comes up, and then, you find out, oh, they have a Patreon, and then people will support for that. And finally, one example of a really big YouTuber. Right now, big YouTuber is over 1 million subscribers, and just shows how consistency pays off over time. And for 4 years, the first 4 years, he's under earning less than $1,000. And if I just showed you those first 4 years, it could be like a lot of other graphs that just kind of go up and then kind of go down, and maybe the person quits at that time. But that's really, if you love what you're doing and you keep consistently posting, at one point you're going to start making some content that resonates more with people, and the algorithm is going to pick it up. And all of these kind of spikes that you see in amount of patrons is when one of his videos gets way more popular than the others, and just brings in more and more people, and it just starts compounding on itself. And sure, at this point, you're not just working on your game. Also, the videos have their own value. It's high production value, so the videos themselves are the content. But if you love doing this kind of stuff, why not? It's a really nice way to do it. And then, so these were all sort of examples of free stuff that you can just watch on YouTube or read on a blog. But they are, if you just want to charge money for, so basically you're charging tuition for your knowledge, there's also websites that are specifically for this, like Skillshare is a subscription-based one. And there's a lot of tutorials about art and game development that you could be the one creating. Again, if you have questions about this, I have more examples that I can talk about in the Q&A section. Udemy is similar, but you pay per class. So these are the sort of options that are out there. The very final one we're going to do for development insights is if you sell assets, like I was saying, that's also an option. And also if you just create tools that you want to do. So asset stores, probably nothing new to any of you. We're a place where you can buy scripts and shaders or 3D models. This is how Unity store looks like, and Unreal Engine Marketplace. It's very varied how much money people make. It's like from a couple hundred to a couple thousand, and it's yeah, very, again, I can talk more about it later on, because it's, you know, it fits for some people, it doesn't for others. If you might have also created a software that is not tied to Unity or Unreal, but just help something in development. You could just sell it on itch or Steam. Again, just a couple of examples. You know, this is the stuff that you see on itch. You know, it can be stuff from $2 up to $20, $30, like the price of a game. And then on Steam, you will find even bigger software like Vegas and Game Maker Studio. But at this point, you know, when you're selling something for $100, it's creating this tool might be just as hard, if not harder, than making a game. So at this point, you also have to ask yourself, well, how do you want to spend your time? And if you love making tools, then definitely this is a great option. But otherwise, you might, you know, be better off doing something else. And then finally, on Patreon, there's also a lot of people that just take money through that. We'll just look at a couple of examples. Inkle is a very successful company making narrative games, and they just have their own the narrative engine. It's free and open source. And yeah, sure, if you have it out there, why not also put a Patreon account where you can get some money for it? And here's another example. This is an HTML5 game engine. And, you know, if you it has twice as many patrons, and this 1.8K money that's shown there, that was before that spike happened. So then right now he would be making way more. So it's definitely something you could live off of. And then, you know, after you've done worked on your engine, you can, you know, make your own games and stuff like that. And here's another different example of how people are using Patreon. In this case, they are creating stylized shaders with a stylized look. And basically each tier that you get is you're just getting access to the Unity files. So in this kind of a, like, they have their website that links to each thing that they've done. It links to a Patreon post. So this is almost more like a storefront. It's an alternative. But ran through Patreon. And you kind of build your own little brand instead of just using search engine, like, you know, search on the asset store. Here, because it's a monthly thing, you kind of keep your customers and bring them along as you create more assets. And again, I want to give you like a lot of different examples of, you know, what's also realistic. Will Ty's been working on his pixel art tile sets. 6 years, hardly reached over $200. And this is also a lot of campaigns. You know, you might be persevering, but at one point, people then also, they have to sort of focus elsewhere. So yeah, here's, hopefully this gave you kind of a full picture of, there are also a lot of other things people do, not just working on their game to make money, but it is sort of more for people who are willing to put themselves out there. Definitely for people who are like, I hate social media, I don't want to post stuff online and, you know, post myself online, then you're better off, you know, getting a publishing deal. But for those of people who enjoy, you know, sharing what they know and doing this other stuff, there's a lot of options out there. So right now I've pretty much introduced all of the kind of things that you can get money from. But I just want to go into from a couple of different more perspectives to look at these things. So first of all, you might be deciding, well, what kind of products do you want to make? Do you want to make games that are, you know, you pay up front for a certain price? Do you want to make free stuff, or pay what you want is in between? And so if you have an online store, that would be, it's the most flexible option because you can do whatever you want with it. So here, as we have already said, the PayPal, like you just integrate PayPal or Stripe, something into your website, and all you lose is the 3 to 5% credit card fees, depending on what your price is of what you're selling. And then I mentioned Humble Widget is the easier version of it, because you, like, if you have your own integration, you have to take care of VAT, taxes, and this kind of stuff, whereas Humble Widget takes care of this kind of stuff. On top of that, they take 5%, but that 5% is probably very, you know, for all the trouble that they take away from you, it's probably worth it. And then obviously, if you're gonna just have the game out for free and just accept donations, it's basically the same thing. You have a PayPal or a Coffee page where you accept things from. Distribution platforms, if you choose to publish through them, if you don't want to publish through your own online store, this is actually the most common, as you probably know, is to go with a specialized platform that is just for selling video games. Obviously, you know what I'm talking about if I tell you that most games come out on Steam, or mobile games come on, app stores and good old games and stuff like that. The classic, this is where you lose 30% of the profits, so way more than on your own site. But on the other hand, you get the discoverability, as I said. Epic made a lot of, news headlines when they offered there at I think 12%, but Epic is still curated, so you can't just put your game on Epic, but you have on Steam or on the App Store. Humble Store is another alternative that a lot of people use, and this is not the same as the Humble widget, but it's from the same people. But this one is also a storefront where you get discoverability, and they have their own little subscription that people can pay to get access to the games. It's different stuff, 25% cut. And then itch.io is the most flexible one. The default is 10%, but it's completely adjustable. You can go from 0 to 100% how much you want to give back to itch. They will also host games for free. Well, so does Steam and others. But they will also have the pay what you want, so just name your price. And even when you have a price set up, they incentivize people to give more. There's these little buttons. So yeah, they're very nice, just maybe not as popular especially with mainstream gamers as Steam would be, more an indie platform. Crowdfunding and patronage. Crowdfunding definitely, starts at, hey, this is the reward, this is how much would cost to get my game if you want to support me. But then they have also higher tiers. If you want to pay more, you also get more rewards. Whereas patronage, there's a lot of people, as we've seen, who just give free content out there, but have a Patreon campaign. And then on the Patreon campaign, you can get at higher tiers more stuff in combination of the free stuff. So these two kind of cover the whole range. How much do these platforms take? 5% on top of credit card fees. So 3.3 to 5 is for credit card fees, 5 is for Indiegogo and Kickstarter, how much they take. And then Patreon has 3 different programs. The 5% is you only can have one tier. If you want to have multiple tiers, they take 8%, and then 12% is when they also do merchandise fulfillment for you. So this is this. Now investment, here I'm just talking about VC investment, if you not the pre-seed stuff that you can do whatever you want, but investors are mainly interested in 2 different things. One is things that can generate a lot of revenue, so things that are going to be sold and make a lot of money that way by being sold to customers or even businesses and stuff like that. Or on the other side, things that are free and are just trying to get a lot of users. So they really need to be things that can reach a big amount of people, because then they are, as soon as it's very popular, the venture capitalists sell it off to some bigger company, and that's how they make money. And then publishers since publishers only get a share of your revenue, they are only interested in things that generate revenue, so only available for paid games. Another way to look at things that also sort of limits what you can do is how big is your team. And as we've talked about merch, it can't even sustain a solo developer. So that's more of a kind of nice thing on the side. Tuition, if you're having your courses and you're among the top paying ones, and I've definitely seen articles where people make 1,000, 2,000, and apparently it's not that hard. That could be a way for supporting yourself. Then when it gets to assets, it's pretty much the same thing, good for solo. And then tools are oftentimes, let's say, created in smaller teams, and then they just put them out. So it's probably not going to be enough to sustain the small team, but it's a typical thing that you could do if you have multiple developers working on it. Sure. Obviously, big teams can also do it, but unless you're Epic and you're making Unreal Engine that sells for a shit ton of money, if you're going to sell your small thing and you are in a company of 10, 20, 30 people, that's probably that tool is going to be a very, it's going to be negligible. Whereas if you're just 2, 3 people, maybe there's going to be a significant dent. And then, for patronage, I really... like we've seen already that it's possible for, it's enough to cover a single developer, but it is possible for small teams as well. Like Dwarf Fortress, they raise 8,000 a month and it's just 2 people. So that's completely doable. And there's even bigger teams. The most popular game or the one that earns the most on Patreon of the games is Paralives, which is pretty much The Sims. And this is an example of like another one of those examples of underserved market. Like it was the same with SimCity, and then City Skylines took over when SimCity wasn't, reaching expectations. A lot of people are not happy with The Sims, and there's no real competition out there. So, those markets are ripe for creating something like this. And the game isn't out yet it earns 40K a month from all the supporters that just want to see it happen. Another example is a game about horses and horse riding. The earnings there, 300, that was before, that's when because you can, on Patreon, you can hide how much earnings you have. It's an option. And so the 360 that it says there, that's way before that spike has happened. And so, now they would be probably making close to 10K. So definitely enough. And it is supporting a team. And so, there are definitely these kind of campaigns that have way more than 1,000 patrons. And so if we actually look at the stats of how many campaigns have more than 1,000 patrons, it's actually less. It's about 100 of them. And this is in the games category. There's 12,000 creators in the games category. And this is the graph of how many patrons they have. So it's very, very skewed. And I have more graphs like this. Again, I don't have time to show everything. Ask me if you want to see more of these stats, because it really depends on, like here, for example, you can see these are all different creators at 100 patrons, but how much they earn per patron is very different. It's very different if you earn 20 per patron or $2 per patron. I have here's the distribution sort of, most people, the average is actually 4, but then there's this huge distribution all across. And again, I have more graphs. Just ask me at the end if you want to know more. So that was patronage. And then, that's the only way you're going to be able to sustain like a big theme is you got to sell your game, or maybe not the only one, but it's like your game has to be, the game is the thing that can make a lot of money. And we've seen crowdfunding campaigns for big teams like, Double Fine and alpha funding, Minecraft, for example, right? It started actually as a free thing. So it was in the donation territory. And then when the alpha came out, I think it was at $5, Notch was a solo developer. And then as that started generating more money, he was able to pay other people. So it became a small studio. And now it's, a big studio or a medium studio throughout the alpha. And now, so it covers basically it's nice how to see how it sort of grows with the developer. Publishers, we've also seen, definitely we have indie publishers who are more than happy to publish your solo game or for a small team. And then obviously for big teams, we have AAA publishers. And similarly for investors, here we have to differentiate. If you're a solo person, here I'm talking investments about, your parents and yourself, and no venture capital, like venture capitalists are looking for teams only, and they're looking for teams that can grow and scale. So the venture capital only applies to small and medium, large, and especially small that want to grow large. Whereas if you're gonna want to stay solo or small, that's probably not your way to go. All right, we have 2 more. Fan base, because like I said on Patreon, it's there's a really big difference how many supporters you can reach. Like we've seen that graph that I can talk more about that later, but how many people can you reach? Can you get to 1,000 patrons? Can you get to 100? Can you get to 30? Like this really depends a lot on your fan base. And this is something I've been talking a lot about in the past, of like, especially encouraging people to start market themselves early, because it's very important how much of a reach you have online when you're going to be posting this kind of stuff. If you're not going with a publisher that takes care of marketing, you are the one that has to deal with this. So let's see what our options are depending on where you are on social media. So if you're completely unknown, making assets and tools or creating courses, completely not a problem, because it all comes down to somebody searching for pixel art in the asset store or this, you know, Skillshare or something like that. It just matters how good your ratings are. So you can be a very experienced person. If you make quality materials, definitely you can do this. By the way, I don't mean here that it's not possible to do it if you're a popular. Obviously, it's going to be even easier and better. But what I want to say is that if you're a popular, there's going to be other options that I think are better off, because you could be making money with your game instead of sort of doing this distraction with, you know, making a course or something like that. Publishers, they have zero problem if you're unknown, because that's a lot of times the point is the publishers are the ones who are popular. They have their own popularity. They will take care of the marketing. So, you know, that's completely fine. Investors, the same thing. They care way more about your CV, what kind of stuff you've done, perhaps about the idea, what kind of reach does it have, instead of how many Twitter followers you have. I really like donations as a way, like if you put something free out, I think that's a very good way to grow. So donations, you for accepting, like putting your game out for free and then just accepting donations, or, you know, pay what you want. I think this is good when you're starting out, because you're giving something to people, some value, and then if they like it, you know, they will tell friends about it, and you slowly, as you're completely unknown, I think it's a nicer way to grow your popularity. And then patronage, I think, is very nice to sort of take you throughout this whole way. You know, it gives you the same kind of growth, but on a monthly basis. So let's take a look at a couple more examples of this. And yeah, one thing I want to point out, this whole growth thing, like you see it, but it's going to be oftentimes very long-term process, as I think you've seen over these graphs. Like here, again, another graph, it's like for 3 years, the first 3 years, if you look at the first half of the graph, 3 years to just reach 20 patrons, right? And but then, you know, you have this spike, and then it gets to more. The way I see social media oftentimes is kind of like you are, every time you post something, it's kind of like you bought a lottery ticket. You have a chance that you might win, or how much you might win. And all you can do is you can keep posting, and every time you post, you can get more lottery tickets, right? You have a bigger chance of succeeding, because very oftentimes you don't know which thing is going to really resonate with people. And every time something does resonate, yeah, you're going to see these kind of spikes. And I showed that before on those YouTube videos as well. Here's an example of a little bit faster growth if you really focus. This is another game about horses. Horses are really popular, as I've learned. This is just 1 year campaign. For the first half a year, just at 50 patrons. But then they really ramped up the marketing. And in the rest of the half a year, they went up all to 3,000 a month, which is great. You can see here correlation with Twitter. They started at 0. And you see how it very well correlates with it. You know, on Twitter, they only got to 500 followers. I only have a graph for this one. But on Instagram, they did the same thing and grew to 24,000. You know, it's good to know your market. So horses better on Instagram. However, they are a team of 5 people. 3,000 is a lot of money, but it doesn't really, you can't leave 5 people off of it. And yeah, that's the case here as well. 3 of them work on halftime. One of them is at 30%. One of them is at 25%. And in addition to that, they just had in April, right now, they had a Kickstarter campaign where they raised 50K about. And not only that, they also just announced that they also raised 50K from the Norwegian Film Institute. So they got a grant from the government for it. And now you're looking at, okay, I'm making 3K a month, plus I have this 100K. Now you can have a studio running with 5 people. So we'll see, their goal is still to eventually all be full-time, and we'll see, if their popularity grows with time, they will certainly be able to do this. And, if you're already popular, joining a Patreon at that time, obviously is just gonna be good for you. Here's Sockbox Collective, here's their Twitter. You can see that they already started with 4,000 followers. But then they grew to 23,000. And as soon as they started, they already had 100 patrons. They didn't have to grow them. They started 100 patrons. So then the whole thing is just that much bigger. So they grew from 100 to 2,000. So just the more popular you are when you start, just the bigger scale you probably can see. All right. If you have an alpha if you have a game, if you have an alpha that you want to charge money for, there's a difference. If you want to straight up charge money for, I would suggest, if you're completely unknown, I more suggest doing something, giving out something for free. Whereas if you want to actually straight up start charging for it, I think it's better if you already have at least a little bit of a following, because, charging straight up for 10, 20 bucks when nobody knows about you might be a little bit harder sell. So I feel like, you can use this to grow with, use it as you have grown a little bit more. And then for crowdfunding, 100%, I don't want to say that you could be that you should be doing it when you're unknown. And so I'm just going to show you some examples. There's a lot of Kickstarter campaigns that I've seen that only reach 100 people and they fail. They barely raise any money. You would be way better off if you're on Patreon in this case, because you could reach the same 100 people. Maybe they're not going to give you $10, but they're going to give you $2. And, now you're at least getting this money, because Kickstarter, you don't if you fail. And in fact, even if you get less than 1,000 backers, it usually leads to unsuccessful campaign. That's sort of my rule of thumb, is like, for successful campaigns, and here I have examples of like campaigns that I backed. I have way more, but it's like 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 2,000 people, 3,000 people. Like, for example, here, this is Johan Vinet. He has 30K followers on Twitter. Maybe he had 20 or 15K when the campaign came out. But, it's like that's what you can convert. You can convert 10K followers to let's say 1,000 backers. You can't, or it's very, very hard, very few, if not impossible, if you have, 100 followers on Twitter, that you're going to get to 1,000 backers. Obviously, if you're a very popular name, that just works in your advantage. Ron Gilbert, also of Monkey Island fame, he can raise $500,000. If you're Chris Roberts, who made Wing Commander, you can raise $2 million. If you made Fallout in the past, you can raise $3 million. But, most of us here talking about this are not in this situation. There are some exceptions. And these ones are the ones that kind of like, you wish you were them. Is this sort of runaway cases where relatively, for how much they are popular, they got way more backers. So small studio got 5,000 backers, but it was a Zelda game that looks like the original Zelda. It has that nostalgic component when you see it. There's a lot of examples like this. Another nostalgia for the NES. 15,000 backers. Nostalgia for the 80s, 5,000 backers. There's, again, underserved stuff, like similarly to my game, educational games. A lot of people are like, why isn't there more stuff like this? So Echo, where you learn about how it's kind of like Minecraft, but you learn about ecology and how the planet works. Yeah, you can get 5,000 backers. Or things that look really good, that really stand out. So Hyperlight Drifter, $500,000. Yes, if you can show people this kind of level of art that was, especially at the time, really sort of groundbreaking. You put in some disaster piece music of who did Fez soundtrack in the background. Yes, it's possible. Blasphemous was another example, $350,000. But yeah, you gotta have the art that catches people's attention immediately, and then every gaming website is gonna be writing about your campaign. So here's the full picture. I have like 5 more minutes. I know we're over 6, so I'm going to be winding down. But I did want to say one more thing. This is from my own perspective as well. As you can see that I think you can read that I'm a little bit of a bigger fan of patronage than crowdfunding. And the reason is, on crowdfunding, you are making a long-term promise. And you have to say when your game will be. You have to estimate when you're going to deliver the rewards. And game developers, shocker, are very, very bad at estimating how fast they will be able to develop their games. And this very interests me a lot. So I started tracking Kickstarter. So I made this spreadsheet where I track when was the game on Kickstarter, when did they say that they are going to estimate their delivery date, and then when did they actually deliver. And so from out of this, I calculate this thing I call the lateness factor. So Broken Age estimated they will need 7 months to deliver, and then they actually took them 22 months to deliver. So their lateness factor is 3.1. And after almost 50 projects tracked over the last 10 years. Here are my findings. On average, you will be off by a factor of 4, with the median being at 3. So we are really bad at estimating stuff. And this means that if you are going to plan, let's say, okay, I'm going to deliver the game in 1 year, in 12 months, and then okay, this is how much it costs me to live for 12 months. This is how much money I'm going to ask for. Well, and now you raise this money. Well, tough luck, because you will probably not spend 1 year. You will probably spend 3 years working on it, and then you will be out of money. And at that point, you will have to find other sources of income. And a lot of people go, let's say, to publishers, or like, for example, for me, I planned to always have a Patreon. So for me, it was planned. But and now I have ideally, my Patreon would grow, that I would keep on working full time. But now I have to have a job on the side as well, because it hasn't grown that much yet. And this, after you are that much over time of your estimated delivery, it takes a big psychological toll on you. So that's just something that a lot of people don't talk about. They just see, oh, how much money I'm going to raise. But there's a big component, and I've seen a lot of people being depressed, and there's a lot of stories like that. And then if you are not very good at updating your backers and telling what the situation is, there's been a lot of backlash. And I have also examples. You can ask me more stuff that I had to throw out. So at the very last, and it's going to only spend like 2-3 minutes on this, the very last perspective to look things is, what kind of game are you making? Because this can also sort of influence what you are, what kind of funding source you want to go for. And especially if you have something that is playable, and specifically something that is highly replayable. Like, this is great for alpha funding, because if you can play every build, because alpha funding is usually you put in new and new alpha versions along the road, let's say weekly or monthly. You want to have a game that's fun to play every month yet again. And so you could have this through, if it's focused on mechanics, like every time you put in a new building or a unit, let's say some city builders or strategy games, this is great for them. Or if it's procedurally generated, something like a roguelite, it's like anytime there's something, a new build comes out, well, also the whole levels change. So it's interesting to play. It's great for multiplayer games, because you need the users to play for multiplayer games. So obviously you want to start selling it and putting it out to people as early as possible. And you want to test how it scales when more and more people play, because it's a technological problem. So you see a lot of games in early access that are multiplayer. And then if it's nice to watch other people's play, let's say on Twitch or YouTube, it's also going to be very good for your marketing. So you can grow, if you start showing your game early and how it plays, you will get attention for it. Now, on the other side, if your game is narrative heavy, something that once you play it, it doesn't make much sense to play it again, well, then you are probably better off with, getting a publisher deal, when you can then work on it in sort of relative secrecy. Or crowdfunding campaign, there's been a lot of them successful for point-and-click adventure, where you, like, for example, Thimbleweed Park, great updates. They spoiler-free. They were just talking about how they were developing the game. A lot of insights into Ron Gilbert's engine and this kind of stuff. Really super interesting if you're a game developer. Episodic releases obviously are specifically for narrative-heavy games. Great thing. And then patronage, I think it goes again across the whole board. I've seen everything from free multiplayer games that people just want to support, to visual novels that get a lot of, that they can post updates without spoilers. And then obviously there's plenty of combinations of stuff. So yeah, thank you very much. This is my look at the different kinds of ways of funding. Hopefully I gave you a lot of examples. Here's the 6 different perspectives and the 10 main ones that I've kind of gone over in very short time. And this is also your homework for those of you who are doing. Go through each one of these perspectives and identify, self-reflect where you are, what do you want to do. I'm going to share these slides. I have like a slide for each one of these that you can sort of have a refresher of what they were. And so for each one of these, look where you are on the axis and highlight which ones apply to you. And when you do this from all these 6 perspectives, you might, you'll get certain of these things. Yeah, this actually makes sense for me. So yeah, hopefully this was useful. And now I will be very happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Matej. This was really like insightful and a lot of like examples like all over the board. Like, it's really cool to see some of like the creators that I know and some of it that I don't know. So yeah, as you said, we're gonna go to the Q&A. And yeah, we have like few questions already.
Sure.
So yeah, the first question is this one.
Any thoughts, experience with product placement? No, I don't think so. Personally, no, not really. I haven't done anything like that. I'll probably have to think about it. Maybe there's something. I've done like freelancing and stuff like that, to get some stuff inside. But for like, I have some secondhand experience. For example, here in the house, we had a developer making a VR game about shooting boomerangs into kangaroos, and you try to save your beer from the kangaroos try to steal your beer. And it's sort of very Australian based, and they just wrote to, hopefully now I'm a little bit paraphrasing, hopefully I'm not misrepresenting this, but they did try to, I think, to write to beer brands, and yeah, they just didn't. Like, a lot of these kind of times, they're not going to talk to you as an indie developer. This is sort of, I guess this would be my experience. For example, I tried to sell my poster that had like LucasArts and stuff. Like, you can send this kind of, hey, would you be able to license me? Because there are stuff that is licensed by, LucasArts and Star Wars merch and official Batman t-shirts. But I've never, like, you as a small person, you sometimes you need connections. So I had only negative experiences, I guess, as a small person.
Thank you for the answer. And the next one is more about the distribution platforms that you talked about.
Yeah. Regarding distribution platforms, should we bother putting our game to platforms other than Steam? For example, GOG or Epic Game Store, do they usually bring a noteworthy percentage of income? I think so. I think define noteworthy. But as soon as I think the investment into putting it on another platform that is as popular as GOG is definitely worth it. Usually it's more of a question of is it worth porting to other consoles, for example? Because once you have a PC build, it's not that hard to just put it on a couple of stores. Maybe it's gonna, even if it's gonna take you like a week for it. Yeah, but now you have a long tail of 2 years. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be, it's gonna be worth putting on multiple platforms because you're not losing anything. When you have to port, however, you are losing stuff. So, for example, the more questionable thing would be: is it worth creating a Mac build or a Linux build? And I think I don't know if I have the stats on my slides, but I think I was just looking at it, and it's like the Mac builds were, let's say, 5% or even less of the whole income. Because I was looking at different people that were actually publicly sharing their results. So it's such a small percentage. Then you are like, oh, if I need to be buying a Mac and learning how to use it, like, is it worth it? The same thing for consoles. But I've seen a lot of times here in the house as well. I've seen examples where it definitely does pay off. And here in the house, we had an example of a game that was out for 5 years on Steam already. And then usually oftentimes you will make a deal with a company that does ports, and they take on the financial burden of making the port, but then you have revenue share out of it. And, a game that's been on Steam for 5 years now has made enough money on Xbox and Switch, especially Switch is a big thing, that, you could fund yourself 1, 2, 3 more years of game development of your next project. So definitely in just putting the existing build to multiple platforms, even if it costs you $100 to publish it, unless you didn't make that $100 even on Steam, then probably you're also not going to make it on GOG. But, if you made 5,000 on Steam, then $100 to publish somewhere else is definitely worth it in my opinion.
Thanks for the question. And maybe like sub question, like did you have any other like plans for your like game? Like I know that your game is more like web based.
Yeah.
But did you...
Oh yeah, sure. Like especially the founder here of Spell Collective, he's been pitching for me to put my game on Steam up for ever since I came into this house, because yeah, he thinks I'm gonna just reach that many more players, and eventually. Right now my game isn't in the spot where I feel like it can sustain a bigger hype on it, because it's not developed as much as I would hope. And but at one point definitely, and you know, even though it's a browser game, all I need to do is I need to make a thin client, you know, basically a Chrome browser put into an app that's being done on. I don't know how I would go about selling it. You know, do I just have a free client for mobile and for Steam? But yeah, that's kind of sort of the idea, is that, yeah, definitely once it's, you know, once my game has graphics and it can be Twitch and YouTube friendly, I want to definitely get the word out, and at those times I would definitely want to go on Steam. The reasoning why going on Steam early might be useful, and why my friend also wants me to do it, is just to get wish lists. Like that's a very common thing nowadays that I didn't touch on. But yeah, a lot of people will pay those $100 to make up the platform, to put it out on Steam, just as almost as a marketing thing, or because especially if you're gonna self-publish, the amount of wish lists you have tells you how much is your possibility of being featured on the front page. And that would, if you're featured on the front page, because Steam is a lot about either you have your own fan base, which is going to bring you a lot of money, or Steam is about discoverability, and that's all about how far are you on the lists on the front page. So in those regards, yeah, it's good to go on these kind of sites early, and basically that's part of your, yeah, and also crowdfunding, I guess. Yeah.
Thanks for that in-depth explanation. And the next question is about crowdfunding. And pledges.
Say you have developers who have pledged to finish a game by a certain deadline via crowdfunding. Are they responsible morally, financially? No, they are not. It's, I mean, morally, yes, I guess. Financially, I don't think I've heard of any, like, maybe there's been some stuff, there's been maybe some that people would actually go and sue, but those would be very rare, and probably maybe from a more like physical stuff or something. It's morally, yes, that's what I was talking about. It is psychologically very heavy on you. So that's up to your moral standards, right? And so, but otherwise, and things have also changed from 2015 when I was there, and a lot of people, because of projects way worse than mine, like mine is taking a long time, but I have alpha releases. Like I've been releasing my game all this time. Keep updating the backers all the time and stuff like that. There's been other projects that have not posted any updates, you know, that are hard to distinguish, are they a scam or not? And in those cases, it's much more, you know, a little bit more questionable. But even in that case, like basically a lot of this kind of stuff has happened back in 2016, 2017. So nowadays, if you go on Kickstarter, it's going to be in big, you know, when you try to pledge, it's going to tell you, this is not the store. You are not pre-ordering anything. All you are investing into some person's dreams, and all they are responsible to you is to give you updates how the project is going. But yes, you do not owe anyone. Technically, you don't owe anyone anything in a way. It's, you know, and people have learned how to manage expectations. So, you know, now most people that are familiar with crowdfunding, at least unless it's their very first time, they know that, hey, okay, I'm making a risk, and they have better risk management.
Can you maybe like, I know that you talked a little bit about it, but like, can you maybe like compare like when you released like in 2015, right? And like how like the platform changed, right? Because I think in the past it was more about like, you know, selling the idea, not even like the finished product. Yes. It's more like kind of like selling an idea. But now, you said like it's mostly finished games, or like mostly like almost?
No,
like...
I wouldn't say mostly. Mostly, I would say mostly things that are at the demo level. Like I've been following projects that have been, you know, just posting GIFs, really cool GIFs, for like 5, 6, 7 years, and they were always, so it's a pixel art game, so it doesn't get uglier with time. You know, it's not a problem if it takes 5 or 6 years of just somebody doodling little pixel art stuff on the side and developing their idea. But then once they had, okay, we have come far enough over these 5, 6 years, now we can actually, that one didn't come out with a demo, but it came out with a really good trailer. But, you know, a lot of these kind of projects, I see that they will be, you know, they will take the advantage of the Kickstarter either, usually to come out with a demo. But there is a big significant amount of people that just do, oh yeah, we are also thinking about going to Kickstarter, but we're just doing it for marketing, just for publicity. But I would say, I mean, I would say it's a minority, but it's much more, I would say it's probably more popular than actually somebody coming up with just the idea. That I have not seen. And that's the thing, that's also the difference. Back then when I was publishing, there was like, press was still willing to write about Kickstarters. And then because press also burned themselves out on all of these campaigns, they stopped writing about them. And then you only have this sort of exceptions like, Blasphemous and stuff that is like now it's way more chill again. And so the best campaigns will get posted about in the press. But yeah, everyone is being very much more careful about it.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. And the next question is about Patreon, I think.
All right. I've seen a few people mention the bad aspect of Patreon. Sending out Steam keys to your patrons means Steam algorithm will place you lower as opposed to getting those sales via Steam. Thoughts? I have to say that I don't have experience with this, so unfortunately I can't give you any first-hand stuff. I mean, yeah, it would be hard for me to say anything on this topic because, I have, like, basically what I can say is that after 3 years living in this house full of indie games developers that sell stuff on Steam, I haven't heard anyone say this, but that's also because not a lot of them, or maybe almost none of them, have Patreons. So this combination of these two things being sort of against each other is a little bit of unknown to me. I do notice that there's, the people are, but I don't know, does that happen if you, because you see a lot of people have like received this product for free. I don't know if that gets automatically applied if you get a key. Sorry, I don't have this information, but we can check it afterwards, I guess.
Yeah, no problem. Next question is about pixel art.
How long did it take you to learn pixel art and how did you approach it? Do you think it's good to start straight in pixel art or learn classical art first? Thank you for the question about art. Well, I've been always drawing on the side, so it took me forever to learn pixel art. I'm still not very, I'm still want to be better, so it's a lifelong journey. So the question, how long did it take you? That's it's impossible to answer. But I can answer your second, I can ask you how I approach it. Well, I really always just love to draw stuff for the games that me and my brother were making. And then when I was working for the magazine Joker, was when I made the cover of the magazine. And at that time, I, for the first time, actually did pixel art as an art form, as an illustration. That's how I got into it. And then I was just learning from tutorials. This was early 2000s when there was a lot of, websites that were just full of tutorials and people would be on forums and you would learn from each other. And even nowadays, nowadays it's even easier. There's so many YouTube channels. There's so many free content, YouTube channels, free articles. That's how I would approach it today. And honestly, we run a school here and we teach pixel art as well, and it's a part of our curriculum. You can even use our curriculum if you join our Discord. We're called the Indie Quests. Anyway, you can ask me in the Discord later. But 100%, I think not that you should you should learn classical art first. I think just by learning pixel art and nothing classical proportions theory figures, you're going to be limited. Like I always say, pixel art is art first and pixel second. So, but it is very possible to learn classical art, proportions theory figures through the medium of pixel art. But here at our school, we teach like drawing with pencils, and then you can do the same exercise that you did with pencils. You can do it with pixel art. And yeah, just ask me more on the Discord. I can send you these learning materials that we have exactly on these topics.
Thank you very much. And next question is about publishing.
All right, you showed what percentage publishers take from the revenue. The numbers you showed mentioned from having to recoup their investment plus markup. What about when we don't need funding, but just marketing? That is a very good question. I mean, they will definitely be lower from what I've read. I don't have any specific, I mean, I only have those numbers because not a lot of publishers will make things public. The one that I have there, they were like, okay, we do, the Neon Doctrine was one of them. And they have like, we take between 30 to 50%, depending on your situation. And this is the situation that you're talking about. Depending on how much they gave you upfront in funding, they might take 50%. If they didn't give you a lot of funding in front, it might be closer to 30%. So I would be guessing that those would be sort of 25%, 30% would be the sort of area where you should be looking at. If you just did the marketing. However, this is just based on that one figure, so I would definitely have to research more. But yeah, it's definitely lower. Everyone talks about it, and that's also the thing. Those are public contracts, but a lot of them eventually then get negotiated on top of it because different developers care about different things. So that's why I said that there's as many publishing contracts as there are games. But yeah, like you have guessed that it is a factor of how much funding they give you in advance.
Thank you for the answer. And while we wait for the more questions to come, one of maybe my question is, did you maybe like did a lot of like research about Patreon?
Yes.
And did you maybe like found like some correlation, like what are like the, let's say top creators, and what are they doing? Are they doing more like assets, tools, games, or is there like no correlation at all?
There is a correlation. They're doing, unfortunately, it's not video games. That's this quote unquote sad thing about the games category. It's the main things are stuff about tabletop RPGs, different things like for physical RPG campaigns. There's podcasts, YouTube channels, there's content creators that are talking about games. And I would say that's way more than the majority of them. I could even, if you look at the top 100, maybe I had to find the ones that are actually, oh, this is for a specific game. So maybe there's like not even a fifth of them would be, at least in the top 100, would be actual games. So and then the other factor, like I said, this sort of nostalgia, something like there's a lot of this kind of campaigns. This is a remake of something. People have abandoned this and we're doing it forward. Or this genre was popular in the 90s. We are doing something like that. That one is as a sort of, if I would get any generalization out of it, that would be my main one, is like stuff that used to be popular, that had an existing market that is not served. I see those doing very well. And then horses and furry community and porn. There's a big, like the whole Patreon is like, these are the categories, and these are all the same categories, but not safe for work. And it's a huge amount. So yeah, that's the reality.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting.
There's more horse games than I have shown. I'm not kidding.
And the next question is about Kickstarter taxes. I think you skipped that accidentally.
Sure. I'm sorry, but you seem to have skipped my question about Kickstarter taxes. I just want to know if the funds raised are fully considered as income and stuff like that. Oh, okay. Maybe somebody else skipped it. Hopefully I didn't skip it. But yeah, very good question. funds raised are fully considered as income 100%, unless you would be it's very hard. First of all, this is one of those things. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a lawyer. You have to, this is not legal advice. For something to be a donation, because that's what we're talking about. Can I, because, these are called donations. Why am I have to pay taxes on it? Sure, yes. To actually have it be counted as a donation, from what I've done, the research into this, you have to be registered as a nonprofit organization. That's the first thing already. And the second thing, there actually has to be, you're not receiving something in return. And that's where usually things break down with Kickstarter, but might not break down with Patreon. With Kickstarter, it's very hard that you're going to be, there are Kickstarters that are, for example, I'm going to make a YouTube series, it's going to be free, give me money. That one, and if it's done by an NGO, potentially, right? But most Kickstarters are not like that. Most Kickstarters are like, I'm going to give you this product, give me what you want. And even Patreon, even for those ones, like for example, for mine, like anything you gain is basically, it's your company revenue. Like I said, again, if let's say that I have a Patreon for, Saving Rainforest, I have an NGO, and I literally I'm not giving you anything in return, I think then you have a case that you could actually make it a tax free. But just because they're called donations doesn't mean that you don't. Technically, all of these are business income, and you have to pay, first of all, VAT tax, because that's also the thing. Patreon, right, is an electronic service, and in EU, anytime you sell an electronic service to somebody, you have to pay VAT tax to the country where the consumer is. So, that's what I have to do in my web store, because I'm selling my game. I had to really code this in. It's like, I have to see, okay, I'm selling it to Italy. What's Italy's VAT rate? Okay, that's the percentage I need to take, and put on my invoice and everything. And in the case of Patreon, they do that for you. So anytime you're going to be, let's say from Slovenia, you're going to be supporting some other campaign, you want to give them $1, they will take $1 plus, I don't know, what's our rate, 22% on top of it, or 21%. So already you're hit by VAT, and in the country where the person is pledging from, because it's an electronic thing. And then whatever Patreon has paid you, or in Kickstarter as well, whatever they have paid you in royalties, that's also your company income. So you also, not only was VAT already taken away from the customer, you are also then going to be paying the income, your income tax. Because it's a question that's been asked a lot at the start, when it was like, but you can just give, it's the same as donations. And and everyone has come out with this answer that there are very, very limited cases where you would be able to actually get a tax write-off.
That's a very, very detailed explanation. I think we're out of questions currently. But Primož is saying hi.
Maybe games. Follow on Discord.
Maybe one last question before we wait for the other ones. Where can people find you? Like, where can they reach out to you if they have any other questions, or maybe like where can they check out your stuff and so on?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to just switch back to the screen.
I can do that, yeah.
You could do that. So yeah, obviously I'm on Patreon, just /retro. And then @Retronator is where you can find me pretty much everywhere, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, just type in Retronator. And the Indie Quest, if you're interested in learning about stuff, our school, the Indie Quest, we put all of our learning materials out for free. We have our Discord where you could ask questions. I also have a Discord for Pixel Art Academy. It's actually a group Discord that a couple of games, or a few games from the house have, that you can also, I don't know where I have the link to that. You can ask me. I can post it in Discord, since it's a Discord thing. So there you can talk to me about my game. But yeah, otherwise, whenever I publish, so my blog is on Tumblr. Good old Tumblr. It's still popular to this day, even now that there's no porn on it anymore. But that's my biggest. It's still my biggest social media platform. But then every time I post something onto Tumblr, I always cross-post to Twitter, to Facebook, to Instagram, and lately to TikTok as well. I'm literally on all social media platforms. That's also something that I do every month. I track my numbers, and I could show you graphs of all the campaigns, how they've done. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen now.
Okay. And we got one more question regarding VAT.
Regarding the VAT, how do you give the VAT from your online store to the specific country this customer is from? Very good question. This is pretty easy when using Humble Widget or Steam, but doing it yourself, yeah, it's actually very easy as well. So I'm not, at least if you live in Slovenia, it's very nice. There's this, well, it used to be called one MOSS. It was like a one-stop shop. Basically, okay, I'm gonna tell you this way. Yeah, the same way when you're self-employed, where we have our electronic tax system, e-davki, since I'm pretty sure you're Slovenian, wherever you pay all of the normal taxes, there's also one form that is specifically for giving VAT to other countries. It's made specifically for this reason. And then, so in my game, I have this dashboard where it tells me how many I've sold in my store and what country they were from. It's quite complicated, complicated. You have to make sure that you know what country they're from. So you have to have at least two pieces of evidence. So for example, where their IP was from, where the credit card country was from, it's either 2 or 3. And so you have to hold that evidence. And now that you know which country they're from, my dashboard displays me, okay, you've sold this many copies to Italy, this many to Sweden, Italy, you know. And then I use those numbers every 3 months. You then have to put this report. This is how much how many customers from each country I got. And then the total sum you just put into one government bank account. The same, basically, the same way as you would pay your estimated taxes. You just give it to Slovenian, one bank account, and then they distribute it to those countries.
Okay, perfect. And I think here we will slowly finish this lecture. Right. Thank you, Matej, for all of your insight and examples and questions and
I hope it was useful.
Yeah, it was. And thank you again. And to everybody watching and all of the participants, we can see you next week on the lecture about publishing. Primož will have that. You already mentioned this, I think, in the lecture. He will go more into like mobile publishing and like publisher deals and so on. So we'll post the link to that lecture in the following week. And we'll also post the materials from this lecture so that you can like see a lot of the other examples that didn't fit into this hour. Thank you, Matej, and we are signing off.
Have a nice day.